Welcome to the Coworking Values Podcast. I'm Emily Breeder. If you're a community manager struggling with reaching your audience, our latest offering is designed for you. In this 3-month cohort, we will help you build your community, learn practical strategies, and stay motivated with personalized guidance. Join us to transform your workflow and strengthen your community management skills. Look in the description of this podcast for more information on how to sign up.
Welcome. My name is Christian from Salter Systems. Looking at the heart of co-working values, it has to be a thriving community. We believe that fostering this connection is key to success. Community is the key for all stakeholders involved, the operators, members, as well as the entire ecosystem. Like us, coming and enhancing user experience with tech solutions to build a secure and safe environment, ease processes and improve the day-to-day, especially for members. That's why we are excited to work closely with this popular podcast. They spotlight the inspiring stories of members, from startups to large operators, sharing their journeys and the impact of our vibrant community. Tune in to hear how collaboration, support, and shared goals turn spaces into a powerhouse of creativity and productivity. Together we are building more. Please enjoy the podcast. Community is the key.
Hello, folks. It's another Co-working Values podcast, and here's your host, Bernie Mitchell. But I'm wildly excited because in the studio, in my luxury Galician studio today, I have Mark Schaefer. Mark, what are you known for, sir, and what would you like to be known for?
I think I'm a teacher, Bernie. As I look back at my career, whether I speak or blog or consult or write a book, I think I'm a teacher. And what I hope I'm known for is that I do my best to just tell the truth, to say what needs to be said and help people solve hard problems.
And that's I was thinking about this as I was wandering around. The first time I heard you was somewhere around the 2010 mark on Mitch Joel's podcast, and what immediately got me to pay attention to your work is that intersection of I work in the big bad real world, and I had a very academic take on things, and that was 14 books ago, is it maybe?
No, I remember, I think the first time we met, I think I gave a talk. It was about my first book, Return on Influence. There was some kind of a meetup in London. I remember you being there.
It was run by Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
And it was run by Shannon. It was in Holborn, and that was it. And then there was this avalanche of stuff. But I always appreciate, and a lot of people from that community you met in London, we always pick up Mark Schaefer books because they're like very well researched, but there's a very practical application. It's not like a load of theory that you can, have to roll over in your brain. So talking of books, why I've pulled you in today is the community book. So we'll put a link to the show notes, folks. So when was it 2023 you wrote that book?
Yes, it was published in 2023. That's correct. So
how long had you been thinking about community? Because it's always, especially since social media hit in the 2000 I never know what you call them now, like 2005-ish, it's been a thing. And then there's been several iterations of the community conversation. And where were you when you got to that book in 2023?
Well, I began studying communities really at the beginning of the internet, because that's the first thing everyone tried to do. Every company had an online community. I remember, even Exxon, had an online community. Coca-Cola put a ton of money and innovation behind their online community, but basically all of them failed because in the early days of the internet, it was just so limited in what you could do. We didn't have, the bandwidth. Literally the technical bandwidth to, watch videos, upload images, all the cool things we like to do in communities today. And everybody was trying to build their own community, which meant you needed to learn their platform, have their passwords. So everything pretty much crumbled. There are very, very few communities that still exist from those early days. But then as the technology improved, then online communities began to improve as well. And not only that, we have a lot more opportunities beyond Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups. We've got Slack, we've got Circle, we've got Discord, we've got all these new technologies that have evolved. And where I started kind of renewing my interest in communities was about 2017 or so. I was working on a book called Marketing Rebellion. And the purpose of that book was to serve as a wake-up call that I saw marketers sort of getting into a trough. They learned how to do some kind of marketing, maybe performance marketing and SEO and digital ads, and they haven't looked up to see the way the world is really working right now. And meanwhile, while we're intercepting people, and spamming people, our customers have the accumulated knowledge of the human race in the palm of their hand, and they expect something more. So I wrote this book, Marketing Rebellion. And one of the chapters in the book was about community. And when I finished that book, I realized that was the most important chapter in the book, that was really going to be a big part of the future of marketing. And I had a thought in the back of my head that might be a whole book on its own. Well, then 1 year after Marketing Rebellion comes out, we have the pandemic. And people start writing me, and they're leaving me notes and saying, Mark, all the things that you predicted in Marketing Rebellion are coming true. It's all being accelerated because companies at that point, they had to get rid of this fake scaffolding of, these weird advertising images and all these words. Everybody uses the same thing. And they had to just shed all that and really connect on a human basis. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we also saw the rise of online communities. And so that was one of the things that really propelled me to write the book, is that, I just knew this was going to be the next big thing in marketing. And just a side comment, this is my one little mic drop moment of my career, perhaps. The day I finished the manuscript for the book was complete, ready to go to the editor. McKinsey came out with a major report that said community is the next big thing in marketing. So I really felt good that I nailed it.
That's how, because in that research, I kind of know this, but so I'm just going to go with the question. Like, people think, probably people like me, look at Pat Flynn with like 15 million, whatever it is, people in his community, or Mr. Beast or some other big company, and go, I could never get there. But I always think, and maybe I'm wrong, that most active communities are like, under 500 people, but we all think we need to have like 20,000. Is that what's the benchmark or the reality of the situation?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I actually explored that when I was writing the book, because what's the benefit of a community? For most people, it is this human connection. It's networking. So in that regard, it's like the smaller, the better. And one of the people I featured in the book is a woman named Dana Moustaff. Dana is truly a visionary with community. And when I spoke to her and interviewed her, her community was about 80,000 people. And I said, gosh, and she came up with some very, very clever ways to sort of automate humanity. I know that sounds weird, but she came up with some clever ways to do that. And I said, gosh, how big is too big? And she said, I think once you cross like 2,000 or 3,000, and that really means that, if you've got 2,000 or 3,000, that means you probably have 200 or 300 who are really active. She said, you start to get into a territory where it's just not ideal. And as a matter of fact, Dana sort of scrapped the 80,000 person community and started over in a smaller and more focused way. So I think it really gets down to what you're trying to do. What is your strategy? I have my own community. I think, gosh, I don't know. I haven't looked at it in a while. If I had to guess, I'd say we have maybe 150 members, which means we've got maybe 40 who are super engaged. And that's a perfect size. I mean, I'm not trying to grow it. It is growing organically because people hear about it. People in the community invite their friends who might be interested in it. But I don't have a goal necessarily to grow my community because it's sort of an intellectual salon. So I like having that intimacy. But I guess it kind of depends on your goals.
That's where I am too. Anything. I wouldn't walk in a room and walk out if there were 152 people, but when it gets above 150 and passes 200, I start to like introvertly disengage, and
Yeah.
and I like to know people, and I don't like to do that. Like, hi, Mark, isn't it? Yeah, like so if I do have fewer, like I don't know what the industry requirement is, but I feel that a co-working space with 150 members is a really good amount. So you can,
Sure.
find groups within groups, all the kind of community stuff. You can find groups within the groups, and it's enough to, start a proper fight at a sports game, but it's, people can go into their little pockets. So if I've got fewer than 150 members, say I've got 100 and I want to get to 150, how can I kind of communicate the community without sounding like a growth hacker? And because I think it's not just buying more ads and stuff like that, because you want to keep that personal touch that you alluded to just now.
Well, I think the best thing that you can do is create activities and content in the community that makes people want to share it. That organic advocacy is better than anything you could do or anything you could say. So, for example, one of the things we do on my community is every month we bring in some guest speaker, and usually it's someone who's very well known. We've had like Robert Cialdini and Philip Kotler and Ian Hanley and different sort of luminaries in the marketing space. And this is something exciting, right? This is something extraordinary. And when people have the opportunity to be in a meeting and be face to face with Ian Hanley or Philip Kotler, they share it. They talk about it. They post about it on LinkedIn. They might even take a screenshot. So I do nothing to advertise the community or promote the community, really. I might mention it. You're interviewing me about community, so of course I'm going to mention my own community. But the growth comes from organic advocacy. So if you're creating something of value in your community, that's going to get shared, and that's the most powerful thing you can do to grow your community.
I have a technical question here. So there's this never-ending conversation about how to market your co-working space, and you have to be discovered, obviously, but I always encourage people to go for that advocacy route, whereas people love to go for SEO and Google AdWords and everything like this.
Yeah.
And my gut feel, which is different from academic research like yours, is that word of mouth and newsletter communication is going to get the right people on the bus more, or a different type of person rather than the SEO Google AdWords path. And like, what would you recommend there or suggest?
I'm not sure. Probably a combination of both. I really haven't studied the space enough to know, but certainly if a co-working space is in a city where there's competition, you probably want to try to be found in the search results, at least number one or number two. Um, I do think that word of mouth advocacy is always it's the purest, most trusted form of advertising, and it always will be. It's really the only real anti AI sort of marketing, because when people talk about you organically, it is the most believed marketing you can hope for. And I guarantee you that everyone who belongs to your co-working space knows somebody who needs to be part of a co-working space somewhere in their sphere, somewhere in their network, somewhere in their family. And so if you can create something that gets them to talk about you, that's certainly, I think your hunch is correct. That is certainly the most powerful thing that you can do, the most effective thing that you can do. But, I wouldn't rule out, SEO and advertising. It would depend on the competitive
Yeah,
situation.
I certainly wouldn't not do it. I'd like
Yeah.
lean more to the other side. So my other thing is the never-ending brand conversation, Mark, is I have, and these are very nice people. Several times in my illustrious marketing consultancy career, I've stood in a room with people who haven't opened their co-working space, or they've just opened their co-working space, and they look a bit confused, and they go like, "Oh, we're all about community here," but there's like the programmer over there and there's the architect over there, and they only talk to each other when they get to the kitchen. So like, who is your community? And they're like,
Mm.
"Oh, it's all about community, mate. Bernie, it's all about community." And then they say some version of like, our brand stands for community. And I kind of, I know the vein in the side of my head pops out because I want to be polite, but I think I know you've been asked this like a million times, like, who owns your brand? I'm standing in a co-working space and I own it. Is it my brand, or is it my community's brand, or is it like whatever happens when, the next 100 people turn up?
Well, that's a very important question. And it's a question that I would answer differently today than I would have answered it maybe 15 years ago. In the early days of marketing, a brand is what you communicated to other people. It came through your advertising, it came through your marketing, it came through every customer touch point. It was highly, highly about control. When I was a young guy in marketing, I'll never forget, we had oh my gosh, this huge 3-ring binder, talking about every little element of the brand, the colors that you use and the font that you use and the tone that you use and the approval process. And certainly you need some of that today. But the big difference, Bernie, is that increasingly today, a brand is what other people say about you rather than what you say about yourself. Now, you can influence that by how you show up in the world, how you show up in the community. I think it's still really important to define who are you? A brand is about creating an emotional expectation between you and your customers. So, like if I said, Bernie, in the town in Spain there where you live, Coca-Cola is going to build a hotel. You can probably envision it in your mind. You can probably imagine what that is going to look like and feel like and sound like when you walk through the front door. That's what a brand is. It's this emotional expectation. When they hear your name, they think of this certain thing, and that's important. So you've got to be consistent the way you're going to show up. From a large extent, it's an extension of your corporate culture. If you're buttoned up and legalistic and hierarchical, that's what's going to show up. If you're sort of loose and friendly and really customer oriented, that's going to show up as well. I do think you need to be mindful about that. I do think you need to be intentional about that. Um, and hopefully that intent is what your customers will communicate. So we just talked about this, organic advocacy. If you create something really cool in your community, people are going to talk about it. They say, "Oh my gosh, Bernie created something really cool. Wait till you hear what I did today," and that becomes part of your brand. And so that's the best possible sort of connection between brand and community.
So one of the things about a co-working space or neighborhood space or whatever people want to call it this week is a it is a it's a functional, practical building, but it's also a building that is a community. So there's a group of
Yeah.
people who very rarely do you get, quite often it's like independent economic agents and micro businesses in a co-working space. And that's the massive value of going there, and they get this nice community vibe going. And then there's the person who owns the co-working space, or this could also be the community manager, and they kind of end up being the community leader. And there's this delicate balance of being there's this fine line between that being the community leader or the head honcho or the the kind of top down domineering egomaniac.
Mm,
And like someone I've always thought, which I was reminded of when I was rereading your book for this podcast, is Mark Masters
mm,
and You Are the Media, because he
mhm.
has that. I know it's like 10 years that's been going. So
Sure.
it is a massive horizontal community vibe where people turn up and say, "Can I do this?" And I think it's I've watched that grow over the years, but also it's not all about Mark. It's how do you get that? And like, if that was a very long-winded question, sorry, Mark, but
Yeah.
that energy.
Well, if it's just top down and you're doing all the work and you're creating all the content and you're hosting all the events, then it's not really a community. It's an audience. And I talk about that difference quite a lot in the book because it is a point of confusion in the world. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I have a blog community or I have a podcast community." Well, no, you don't. You've got an audience, and an audience is awesome, by the way. But it's one way. If you go away, the podcast goes away. If the podcast goes away, the audience goes away. But in a community, people know each other. They connect. They collaborate. They work together in different ways. They become friends, and that goodwill, that friendship overflows to you, the brand. And so that's why my book is called Belonging to the Brand, because it's different. If you have an audience, well, if someone better comes along, then they're going to switch. You really don't have a control over that. But in a community, they don't just have this emotional connection to you, they have this emotional connection to each other. And to leave your brand means leaving their friends, and they're not going to do that. So you really they literally belong to the brand at that point. Now, how do you achieve that? one of the most important things in a community is status. And Bernie, I mean, this is something I learned myself. I mean, in some ways, leading a community is counterintuitive to what we learned in business school. It's about giving up control. It's about encouraging others to lead. And one of the things that happened in my community is someone would say, "Hey, I have an idea. I'd like to start this new thing. Can we start this new thing in the community?" And as long as it sort of fits within the boundaries of my community, I would say, "Yes, why don't you start it?" And the person would say, "Really? That's something I could do?" I would say, "Yes." Now, in the corporate world, there's sort of like this fear that if you raise your hand, then you're going to get picked and you're going to have to lead the darn thing. But in a community, they actually want to, because that's a community is a status machine, and you have to award status in a community for it to function. People have to think, I am heard here, I am seen here, I belong here. And as the community leader, you've got to dispense that status all the time and give up power, give up control. So today in my community, I run almost nothing in my community. I keep it safe. I dispense status. That's about it. All the major discussions, all the major programs in my community are run by other people. My community would continue to flourish even if I wasn't there. So I can still benefit from the community, but I don't have to do all the work. And the leaders are emerging.
That's great. I've got one last question. Is a scenario I see frequently is I'm going to talk, instead of talking about co-working spaces, I'm going to talk about pizza restaurants. There's, Mark and Bernie are brothers, and 15 years ago we opened a pizza restaurant together, and it's, the hub of the local community, and it all works really well. And then suddenly Pizza Hut moves around the corner, and they have a astronomical advertising budget. They're outspending us on Google AdWords, and they have offers. They have opening offers that we can't compete with, and we know are a bit crappy. And people just start going there, and like that happens in a co-working scenario repeatedly, and especially as co-working becomes more and more mainstream. How what and you so what would you advise Bernie and Mark's pizza thing to do?
Well, it might be difficult if you're facing a crisis to start a community, because a community,
Can I backpedal there, because I'm left out one thing is
yeah,
the feel of community and what we think people want, which the connection, the community, and the meaning and change and everything we talked about in this podcast is in that pizza restaurant, but people are going over there because it looks more and more shiny. Sorry,
sure,
that
sure,
was a key component to the question.
yeah. Well, it's funny. I've got an example. I'm working on a new book. Um, it's not really about community, but it does have an interesting community example in it that is relevant to you. So, one of the case studies in the book is a jewelry store, and so this is a family owned jewelry store, um, in my hometown here of in Tennessee in America. And they had two locations, and they started, I think it was in the 70s. And what's happening in the 70s is what? Shopping malls, chain stores for the first time. And now we've got this family owned jewelry store fighting against these big chain stores that have huge networks and distribution systems and buying programs and marketing programs and advertising, and they can beat this local jewelry store in almost every way. in terms of the price and sometimes even the quality of the product. And truly, what this person did is he said, the one thing we can do that nobody else can do, it's the relationships in the community and developing sort of this feel. He actually, to distinguish his store, he actually turned it into a big log cabin, which is sort of like a frontier pioneering kind of place. But you have a warm feeling. It's just like completely different. Instead of being in a strip mall, you're walking into this like almost like this homestead. And so he did create community around his personality and his brand that help fight back these stores. And I think community is the secret weapon for small businesses. So if you've got a pizza store, you're the owner of the store and everybody knows you. If Pizza Hut comes down the street, nobody knows the Pizza Hut, who anybody in the corporate enterprise of Pizza Hut. Nobody cares, but they have a chance to love you and believe you and connect to you. And that's the beginning of community. And, are there ways to use your space in a way that benefits the community? What time does your restaurant close? Maybe it closes at 9 or 10 o'clock. How can you open up that nice restaurant space to some community group who needs the space? That's something. There's a athletic wear brand called Lululemon. That's a big chain store, but that is truly a community because they open up their space after they close to different community groups and fitness programs. So I believe. I mean, it seems sort of counterintuitive, but community is the superpower for small to medium-sized businesses. That is something that can be achieved much more readily, much more effectively by small businesses than by big corporate chains.
I've always wanted that to be true, and I feel my gut feel is it's getting more and more and more that way, and I think it's because people micro, small, independent economic agents. They have the technology because how we make this podcast now is like way quicker and easier than it was 10 years ago. But also we started to believe in ourselves more. That's my gut feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Where any final words of wisdom, Mr. Schaefer, before we pack up our gear and head to the after show party?
I am looking forward to that party. I've never been to a podcast after show party, so that should be exciting.
It is.
One of the things that I think is something. It's a powerful idea that we didn't really talk about today. We talked about the connection between brand and the community. I'd also like to mention briefly the connection between personal brand and a community, especially if you're a small to medium-sized business. A community begins with trust. Either they, trust like what you're doing because they've heard about you, or they literally trust you because they know you as a person and what you stand for. And so to the extent you can build your personal brand, that's an excellent way to start a community because people say, oh, yeah, I've heard of that person. I've seen that person. I've seen them speak. I've read their content. I've heard others talk about them. Yeah, they have a community. Yes, I'd be interested in them because I've heard of them. I believe in them. So especially for a small to medium-sized business, I would recommend looking at building your personal brand as an enabler to your first community, because a community begins with trust and a personal brand is all about trust.
That is superb advice. Like really, really good. And a lot of co-working spaces that have gone the distance, lasted more than 10 years. There's not a rock star, person running it, but there is a person with a defined personal brand. And, you go like, I need to go and see Tori at Mainyard or Fernando at Co-working Lisbon or Alex at Indie Hall. It's, and there's about another 20 people there, but I'll stop talking, who are the keepers of the community. I'm going to resist the temptation to ask another question. Mark, we're going to put everything in the show notes, but where's the best place to chat with you, find you, hunt you down online?
Well, it's easy. You don't have to remember my name, let alone how to spell it. You just have to remember Businesses Grow. That's my website, Businesses Grow. You can find my blog. You can find my podcast now in its 12th year. I think my blog is in its, I want to say maybe 16. Yeah, I think it's year 16. You can also find the book that we talked about today, Belonging to the Brand, Why Community is the Last Great Marketing Strategy, and my other books. So thanks, Bernie, for always a great conversation and being so well prepared today.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's a little bit longer than normal, but I just couldn't stop asking questions. Thank you for your time and attention today, and go to the show notes to find everything in there. And if you're hovering around the internet, go and find wherever you get your podcast and leave a review, because it helps people find great podcasts like this. And be careful out there, it is a jungle.